The 60s was something of a revelation for just about everything, from music, TV, and even sex. Yeah, I said it. But it was also a golden age for the beautiful game. And the star of the decade was undoubtedly Pelé. Regarded by pretty much everyone as the greatest footballer of all time, he won a World Cup when he was just 17 years old, and then won a tournament again in 1962 and in 1970. However, he didn't have the decade all alone to himself, because England won the World Cup, and even some back in Brazil felt like Garrincha was a more important player. To be honest, there are so many players we could include in this 11, so it's been really tough to whittle it down, but here is the best 1960s 11. Lev Yashin. Arguably the two greatest goalkeepers of the decade was Yashin and Gordon Banks, and Yashin is widely regarded as the superior keeper. He's the man who revolutionised the position and had cat-like reflexes. Yashin spent his entire career with Dynamo Moscow and remains the only goalkeeper to have won the Ballon d'Or, a feat which he achieved in 1963. Djalma Santos. The greatest right-back of the decade, Santos was another player who revolutionised his position. However, unlike so many attacking fullbacks, Santos was defensively superb and set the standard for so many great Brazilian fullbacks in the decades to come. A two-time World Cup winner, Santos was just as good in the 1950s as he was in the 60s, and is one of just 3 players to have been named in the World Cup All-Star team 3 times. Bobby Moore. England's World Cup winning captain, played for the entirety of the 60s, spending the whole decade with West Ham. Moore was a centre-half with exquisite reading of the game, and Pelé called him the greatest ever defender that he'd ever faced. And Franz Beckenbauer called him the greatest defender of all time, and that's some praise. Albert Shastinov. Beckenbauer would definitely make the list if this was a 1970s team, however he misses out to this Russian centre-half. Arguably the greatest Russian defender of all time, if not the greatest Russian player of all time, Shastinov's career lasted just 13 years, but spent the entirety of the 1960s, where he spent it exclusively with CSKA Moscow. Jacinto Fischetti. Easily the greatest left-back of the 1960s, and probably the greatest left-back of all time. Fischetti was a tireless, marauding left-back with a tremendous reading of the game. He spent 18 years in football, all of which with Inter Milan, winning 4 Serie A titles, 2 European Cups, and finishing runner-up to Eusebio in the 1965 Ballon d'Or voting. Garrincha. The joy of the people, Brazil never lost a match while Garrincha and Pelé were both playing. Often cited as the greatest dribbler of all time, thanks to his crazy knees, Garrincha was an explosive and exciting winger. Garrincha won 2 World Cups and was named the 7th greatest player of the century, and made it into the world team of the 20th century. Luis Suarez. Possibly the greatest Spanish footballer of all time, Suarez won the Ballon d'Or in 1960 and came a close second in 1961 and 1964, and then third in 1965. A graceful playmaker who scored and assisted on a frighteningly regular basis, Suarez won 2 La Liga titles with Barcelona, and then went on to have great success with Inter Milan, winning 2 European Cups and 4 Serie A titles. Bobby Charlton. Arguably the greatest England player of all time. Formerly England and Man United's all-time leading goal scorer, Charlton's greatest achievements include winning the European Cup in 1968 and the World Cup in 1966, the same year that he won the Ballon d'Or. George Best. Another Man United legend and another Ballon d'Or winner, and another 1968 European Cup champion. Though Best didn't play anywhere near as long as Charlton did, at the peak of his powers, he was truly unplayable. In the 67/68 season, he won the European Cup and the Ballon d'Or, netting 32 times, and he was just 22 years old. Eusebio. To become the greatest Portuguese footballer of all time, Cristiano Ronaldo had to overtake this man for the title. An absolute monster in front of goal, Eusebio netted 423 times from just 431 games for Benfica. He won 11 league titles, 1 European Cup, a World Cup Golden Boot, and the Ballon d'Or. Pelé. Eusebio would have been the greatest centre-forward of the 60s if it was not for this pesky Brazilian forward. Though his best years came between 1958 and 1965, he still had enough left in the tank to win the World Cup in 1970. Another man who claims to have scored over 1,000 goals, Pelé has officially scored 643 from just 656 games. And that's our team. Who do we miss out? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe.